Welcome to With Hat and Cattle, stories from people who walk the walk and leave you better off for listening. I'm Dani, and today we're talking about something that's quietly shaping how we lead, how we build trust, and how we show up in the world. What it means to lead with integrity in the age of AI. Because here's the fact. AI can write the message, but it can't carry your reputation. So everyone's starting to sound polished and put together, and we're asking, again, what separates the leaders people actually trust from the ones that they don't? And that's what we're digging into today. I'm joined again by Amir Khawaja, someone who spent his career at the intersection of technology, leadership, and transformation. Y'all told me y'all really resonated with his episode. You really enjoyed his stories and his background. And so I could think of no better person to ask to come on to dig into these questions about AI and leadership. And we're not just going to talk about AI. We're talking about trust and credibility and that kind of leadership that still holds up when everything outside in the world is getting louder. Amir, welcome.
Dani, thank you so much for inviting me back here. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
I wasn't kidding when I said when the episode launched, like people were actually texting me and messaging and saying, hey, like this is a really great episode. And I personally thought it was going to be a bit techy and maybe not resonate as much, but it's actually one of the most heard ones. And so like there's a signal here. And I think some of that is you are a leader that we trust and you are leading in a transformative age. And so with Hat and Cattle, our mission is to bring stories that leave people better off for listening. But I think we're a bit evolving to bringing conversations that also leave people better off for listening. And some of that is going to be about AI. So we're going to open with this. Amir, when influence can be automated, what do you think people can still feel that AI can't replicate?
The human connection. You said something that I think we're all experiencing, but maybe we don't vocalize it in the same exact way, which is if everybody's looking polished, what does it mean? Do my words have any value? And that speaks directly to our ability to influence. Now, virtually, I can say any number of things, but you don't feel that human energy when I'm in the same room with you. And that I think is going to be something that we'll all have to spend some time thinking about is, do I want to get out of my bubble and spend time with another person? Do I want to go and maybe stop what I'm doing, close my laptop, interact with my team if I'm in the office? Some of us are working remote like myself. Some of us are actually in hybrid mode or full-time in the office. There's a different level of influence that each one of us is projecting out, right? And we're also receiving that same level of influence. So as AI comes into the picture more and more, I, as a leader, am thinking about, there's different modes in which my influence is going to show up. Which one of these modes is where I'm going to spend the most time in? So right now, for example, I am trying to communicate virtually. There's one mode. If I'm in the office, that's another mode. Do I show up with the same behavior and the same polish? And that comes back to, if I depend completely on AI to polish what I write, is that also polishing the language that I use when I meet you face to face in person or when I'm live on a show like this?
Mm. Yeah, I saw a meme that someone wrote that they were able to write a message without using AI, and someone commented, "Oh, so you're thinking," and it was a reminder of, oh yeah, this is kind of feeling like a new norm, and those critical thinking skills and how you show up are going to matter so much more. Is AI making trust easier to build, or is it easier to fake?
That's a good question. I think a little bit of both, because if I'm an expert in my field and I'm using AI as a partner in doing the thinking that I'm doing, that's building trust and maintaining that trust. And as long as I'm clear about the use of AI, that's great. If I am completely ignorant about a field and I want to pretend like I'm this influencer in that category, Now that's obviously easy to do too, because I can pretend to be anybody. We all have a PhD in our pockets now, whether it's Claude or OpenAI or Grok or any number of LLMs. And that it comes to the point where, I think I said this maybe last time I was here, that liberal arts education is going to be very important for all of us, because we need to have that humane mindset that engineers don't necessarily get. This is not to paint a broad stroke picture, but just in general, I think critical thinking is really where the liberal arts shines in one aspect, because you're asking the question, what is it? Who is it that benefits from whatever is it that you're doing? And that's one of the anthropological or ethnographic questions that people ask. But to come back to your question, if I'm a person that uses AI extensively, one of the things that I should be aware about is that there's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is where I think I know just enough, and this is easy because I can solve for this problem with the help of AI. I think more and more what we'll start seeing is this magnification of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people are actually going to start believing or drinking their own Kool-Aid, like as we used to say back in the day. And that's a very dangerous place. So to build trust from that point of view is, I mean, that's just destroying your reputation, right? If we're talking about our personal credibility, yeah, we'll completely destroy that.
I read something this morning and it made me pause. Millennials, I'm an older millennial, we birthed basically the influencer, and we created parasocial relationships. And then when Gen Z came into the picture and influencers, the friendship, the friendship was the funnel. That was the title of this article or this carousel. And Gen Z realized, oh, they're not our friends. They are just using us to buy products. And now you have Gen Alpha coming up, and this is what they're raised with. And so they don't care if someone is trustworthy or not. Just show me the product and I'm going to decide if I'm going to buy it or not. And that really gave me pause, because we are hearing, as AI is rising, build your trust, create authenticity. But now it seems that Gen A, and I need to research this a little more because I just read this morning, Gen A may be taking what we're learning and turning that on its head. And I have no idea what that means for the future of marketing or for, the future of influencers. But just to take a moment and think, yeah, like it's not just us. There is a generation that's coming up and they're going to buy things from ChatGPT, right? They're going to go and ask it based on reviews. What is the best suitcase I should buy? And it will give that recommendation. So, Amir, curious, have you seen efficiency come at the cost of credibility?
So I personally haven't yet. As I think about how we use AI, at least in my area, there is a desire to adopt AI and find efficiencies and do that kind of work. But I think everybody is self-aware and conscious enough to say, this is what AI can do today. Here's where it's really good at. Here's where it's not. How do we solve for it? I think that problem-solving engineering mindset is protecting everybody's credibility, at least in the circles that I'm in. Now, maybe there are circles where this is not true and people are running around claiming things that they really shouldn't be, but at least in my circles, I can't make that claim.
That's interesting, because I hadn't thought of it as you are, again, at that intersection of technology and change and leadership, right? So the everyday person now has access to these tools. And I'm reminded of, is it Deloitte, who turned in an assignment, a project, and it was wrong. The AI had hallucinated information, and they ended up having to pay the company who hired them to do that report thousands and thousands of dollars. And that's just one example. And do you feel that's an issue right now, that it's so highly unregulated? We are just trusting the companies to put the guardrails in and not the government?
So you're hitting on a very loaded topic, Danny. So
Oh no,
I'm
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 you
like
don't have to answer if you
resisting.
don't want to.
I'm resisting all the different thoughts that I want to communicate here. But let me pick a few so I don't get too crazy with this particular area. So the one that you're referencing, if I'm not mistaken, was in Australia.
Yes,
We're talking
yes.
about one of the big five consulting companies producing an artifact which effectively was inaccurate, and the government had paid tens of thousands of dollars, and they had to in fact refund all that money, right? And then do the work over again. So I do remember reading that article. Here's the important thing to understand. If you have AI at your disposal at work or anywhere else, understand what it's actually doing. A lot of people right now, if you remember back when computers were first introduced, they were talking about computer literacy.
Yes.
And literacy was really the starting point to get everybody on the same playing field. And then you can start doing these fancy moves on the playing field once you got everybody there. So AI is no different. The difference is the speed at which things are happening, the speed at which things are moving. The literacy piece of it is constantly being updated. So if you're not in it every single day, using AI, understanding what it is, picking up and paying attention to what it's saying when you ask it a specific way versus when you ask it a different way, those are the kinds of next level skills that everybody will need to become familiar with. So, as an example, hallucination. You're citing a very common use case where, hey, you cited this paper that doesn't exist, and it's from a research scientist that maybe is real, but the work doesn't exist. So, you're effectively creating made up work. Now, AI by default, implicitly, if it doesn't know, it's designed and programmed. Well, maybe programmed is not the right word here, but it's designed to operate to always give you an answer. Now,
Mm,
maybe people realize this, maybe people don't.
I
We-
didn't. That's new to me. I didn't
Yeah,
realize it's not going to tell you I don't know.
no, it doesn't. Now, here's what I've learned in my practice. And uh, recently worked on writing a series of articles talking about the methodology that I've been using called the AI Brain Trust. I won't get into that part, but the AI Brain Trust, if you want to look it up, I've published it on LinkedIn. As of today, 3 of the 5-part series has dropped. 4 and 5 will drop in the future. But the point that I learned from, the practitioner lens in this exercise is you can actually give AI permission. If you tell it, it's okay to say, I don't know. It will actually say, I don't know. But you have to be able to give it permission. So a lot of the things that are by default the behavior of AI, what you don't realize in the beginning as you're prompting it is that it assumes that you want the same default behavior. Can you get a list of all the default behaviors? No, I haven't found it. Maybe you can tell it and it'll give it to you. I don't know how accurate that's going to be. Maybe it's telling the truth, maybe it isn't. But as you pay attention to the outputs that it gives you, for example, you can tell it, hey, listen, I want you to make sure that anytime you give me a response back, make sure that I can go visit this URL publicly. And if it's behind a paywall, I want you to ignore it. Guess what? It will follow those directions. And you can even tell it, like I have, for example, a project that I'm working on where, I experiment with different ideas in different ways just to see what the behavior is. So I can
Mm.
understand how to make predictable output. Because again, GPT by its nature is non-predictable. It's non-deterministic, as they call it. So if I give it permission in advance to say, hey, every time I interact with you, it's okay if you don't know, just let me know. It will actually do that.
That is crazy. And I know I didn't know that. And I saw Austin over here, like, oh my God, it's mind blowing for both of us. So, Amir, where do you draw the line between using AI as a tool and letting it speak for you?
So I am very picky about what I will allow AI to actually say on my behalf.
I am not surprised. Go
Yeah.
on.
Um, so I'll share with you another behavior that I've observed over time. You know, at this point in time, I've used AI for well over a year and a half now. And, like everybody else, I started with basic prompts. I had a file where I had prompts and whatnot. And every single time I gave it a prompt in the beginning, it would basically give me the generic response that it was trained with. Over time, what I realized is that, hey, if I fed it all the different content pieces that I've written over the years, and let me see how it behaves then. So that was the next logical step is I took all the content I've written that was digitally available, not in a paper notebook,
Yes.
and I fed it. And this is when projects was available on on all of these LLMs. And I noticed a difference in behavior. Now, all of a sudden, when it outputs something, it tries to sound like me. Didn't do a great job because it didn't sound exactly like me, but it tried to sound like me. And even to this day, it doesn't sound exactly like me, but it does a better job today than what it used to in the past. Now, it's easy for me to say this, that over time, I expect that it's going to sound more and more like me to where I don't actually have to edit anything, and that it could write emails sounding like me, it could write documents sounding like me, it could do all kinds of things using words that I would use. But I don't think that day is here yet today. It's close. I will tell you this, it's pretty close, but it's not there yet today. What it
Yeah.
comes down to at the end of the day is if it completely replaces, if I don't have to ever edit another document again, and I can just trust that it's going to do the right thing. The question I ask myself is that really me? Or is that the digital twin that I've now created through the work that I've done over time?
Yeah, that's the question I feel that we're all either grappling with now or eventually going to face. And it's a bit, I don't want to say scary. I mean, change is scary, but when I think about the repercussions that it's going to have on creativity and art, as I've discussed this in the past, as someone who works in a field where I need AI, I'm wanting to learn as much as I can. As a poet, as a writer, as someone who has many friends who are creatives, I mean, that's what, we can get existential or philosophical. Like, well, that's what makes us human. And I, appreciate you sharing your insights because, again, I feel you're saying many things that many of us are thinking and feeling. We just aren't saying it out loud. You touched on something earlier, the transparency in using AI. And when I read your LinkedIn articles, I've mentioned before, I appreciate that you quote where you're getting your sources from because I feel that, I mean, you've already established that you are a leader, but when you go and you're putting out information and you're putting out where you're finding that, or your research that's backing that up, that I feel just lends more to your authority. Should leaders disclose when they're using AI?
That's a that's a that's a weird question to me now.
Yeah.
So if you would ask me this question a year ago, I would have said very easily yes. But it's a weird question to me now because we have reached a point, I think, where AI is everywhere. Whether you're using it at work, using it at home, using it in school, it's just there. Announcing it every single time, it's not giving any value to anybody. We just know you're using AI. Now, what you're using it for, is it doing all the work for you? I think we can have those kinds of conversations. But at the end of the day, we can assume everybody's using AI. I mean, I don't disclose it intentionally, but I don't shy away from accepting that I use AI. It does research work for me. In fact, I have every day a task that runs to pull down news topics from the industry that I'm in about topics that I'm curious about. And it takes 5 minutes every day for it to generate this one page, or this not one page, it's a multi page report, but this one document that then I can spend my evening or morning going through and reading and picking out things that are interesting to me and then just double click and dive deeper into it. Now, it's given me the starting point. It's given me some potential angles that I could be interested in looking into based on the work that I do. And it saves me time from expressing that mental energy. So I can now use my energy on something else. And I think that's just going to become the normal default, is that we're all going to use it, whether you put stock in the polish or just say, hey, by default, if it's polished, it's going to be AI. I think that's okay. But at the end of the day, AI is just going to be trained with the information that already exists. It doesn't go and create new information. In the scientific field, that commentary breaks down very quickly, because at the end of the day, you can have very specifically trained AI LLMs that will give you new information, but the speed at which it'll do the work is different. Now, as a poet, for example, you as a poet, I'm not a poet, um, you would be able to create content that you can say is my own. And I think it's the difference between, if I use a food analogy, fast food versus going to scratch kitchens.
Yeah.
We all from time to time will eat fast food. We all crave it. We all fancy it once in a while. Should we do it every day? No, because we know what happens to our bodies when we eat too much fast food. So if we treat our mind like it's part of our body, and it is, and if you feed your mind slop every day, guess what's going to happen to your mind? You're just going to be filled with nothing but noise. And then what happens to your ability to appreciate the more finer, nuanced things in life? I think wine drinkers probably relate to this more. If you drink a certain type of wine, I think, now I'm not a wine drinker, but I've had these conversations many times. There's some wines that are dry and leave your mouth feeling in a horrible state, and there's some wines that are very delightful and gives you, euphoric feelings. It'll be the same way with AI. Are you consuming slop on social media where you don't control what the next reel is going to throw at your face? Or are you actually intentionally consuming content that will elevate and enrich your thinking? And that, to me, is really the discernment factor that Gen Alpha or any future generation is going to have to learn as a skill. How do you, as an individual human being, what is your value? What is your criteria to measure quality from the mass quantity of content that exists out there in time and space? There's a ton of content today that is just nothing but brain rot.
Mm.
And for good reason we use that word. But if I'm going to spend my time, my mental energy, sitting in a chair, walking around, consuming this content, at what point do I say, this next 5 minutes is going to enrich me versus this next 5 minutes is just going to entertain me, release a few dopamine, instances in my body, and that's how I want to spend the rest of my life? I mean, where does the quality of your life then become a factor in your own personal growth? So that's the kind of thing that I think about.
I love where you went to answer this question. One, like, I, f- I feel like you just took me to church. Like, everything just resonated. But even at the beginning of this year, what we are already kind of going into the middle of April, in January, we were asked this question, and people said, oh, well, people are trying to think of maybe a hashtag, like hashtag powered by AI. So I started using that, right? Like, people just want to know, people want transparency. And while you were answering this question, then, my thoughts turned to, it's going to be then, like you mentioned, the opposite. Everyone's using AI, whether they want to disclose that or not. And so now it may be that hashtag, which now we know hashtags are going away because AI is crawling video and captions and comments, and the algorithm knows where to throw your content at or who to throw your content at based on that. So he doesn't need the hashtag anymore. But maybe that hashtag is like my work or not AI. It's shifting. And again, that's what happens when things change, right? Like, there's just constant shifts. And there was just so much in that. And when I say you took me to church, specifically Sunday school, where we were told garbage in, garbage out, right? This is why people enjoy your episode.
You flatter me.
No,
Can I add one thing to that?
please.
It's I'm thinking about the past right now as we're talking, and one of the things I'm reminded about is, if you look at the Manhattan Project, even though the outcome of that project was devastation, it took maybe 20 minds in the core team to build that project, that program, and the research science, behind it, to create this weapon that destroyed so many lives, right? 20 minds behind that. We look at the telephone, which was one mind, uh, to come up with the invention, and then all the other work to build the infrastructure was separate. What we've done with AI as a people of human beings, right, as a society, is we've created multiple minds in the millions and billions of neurons across the world that is looking at data and problems. So if we did with 20 so much devastation, what is machine able to do with billions of its instances running around the world, looking at very different things, training it on that type of information? We've effectively built something that is more powerful than us.
Yeah.
And I'll use product management as a function. Today, I talk to some product people, and their job is to think about how to make usable things in life. They're talking about AI like it's a person. I'm creating a product where AI is the consumer of it. What does that look like? So to your point, there's now this very active line being drawn that says, I'm creating something that has a user interface because the consumer is human, or I'm creating something that has no user interface because the consumer is a machine. And that distinction, to me, is becoming more and more commonplace, at least in my circle. How is that going to reflect when it becomes global? You're never going to talk to a UI. You're going to talk to a voice
Yep.
that's talking back to you.
Yes. I went to a convention. I actually just got back, and it was for self-storage, and there were vendors there that were selling their chatbots, so put in your chatbot and it's like a friend. Oh, you're moving. What size do you need? Or it doesn't even start with that. It's where are you currently living? And then it's like, okay, you're downsizing. So what room are you wanting to store? So then you tell it that. And it's like, okay, well, I recommend this one if you want space to walk around the unit, but if you're okay with stacking, then this is the size that you need. Can I lock you in at this other size? And so I said, oh, before I lock in, can I talk to a person? And it said absolutely, and it gave me a URL that didn't work. And it wasn't geared to talking to a person. I mean, you were supposed to do the whole process with the chatbot. So I went from that vendor to another vendor, and they were selling an agent. And I go, oh, they told me what it did. I go, oh, so it's a chatbot. And he showed me his shirt that said hashtag not a chatbot. So I'm like, okay, well, now I feel stupid. And so I was like, well, explain what the difference is between the agent and the chatbot. And I'll be quite honest, they still seem kind of like the same to me, but it seemed like the agent could think. And I have an industry expert sitting right in front of me, so I'm going to ask the question, can agents think?
So here's how I'd like to answer that question. If
Please.
you build your product on one of the frontier models like Claude or OpenAI or anything else, you're basically building on a foundation that is big. It knows everything about everything, whatever it's been trained with. What an agent specifically is a small subset, a slice of whatever it is that you want it to focus on. So earlier I mentioned this AI brain trust methodology that I've recently published. So I've been working with this methodology for some time. I've ironed some things out and I wrote about it. What this has taught me is really a couple of things. One is an agent is a filter. It's a filter on a very specific domain, and it understands everything about that domain. You just have to tell it, this is what I want you to focus on. It could be, renting homes. It could be just a simple, I want you to look at a dashboard and I want you to pull this information down. But it's a very simple filter. That's how I think about an agent. Yes, it has the same smart as the large language model that's powering it in the background because it has all of that information. But you've effectively told your AI at that point that I want you to very specifically focus on this thing. And this is how, in the industry, at least, wider industry where they're using multiple agents, there's an orchestrating agent behind the scenes. So now you can think of an agent like a person with a very well-defined skill set. So the AI is doing that work for you. It's the same LLM behind the scenes, but now you're telling it very specifically a well-defined skills that you wanted to use. This is an agent. I even name the agents. So, I this way I can keep it straight in my head who the agent is that I'm talking to and what skill set they have.
Thank you for shedding some light on that. So, in our last conversation, actually, the last AI conversation, Tori spoke to, in future roles, we're going to have managers of agents. And so that explains then what she meant. I'm still grappling with an agent, and it's obvious I'm showing that I don't have any agents at work, and that's my next step. That's what I'm trying to learn. So yeah, I guess I'm going to start naming them when I do have them.
And agents will have their own expense accounts.
Yeah, that would not surprise me if it starts charging things in the future. So Amir, you spoke to things you do to stay, in the know and curious. Can you elaborate on that?
You have to put in the practice. So the point that I keep making to my kids is get 1% better. And I don't mean to generalize that for everybody and call your audience kids in any way. So no disrespect. So let's look at what I like to do, right? So for me, I subscribe to the mindset. So in the 1940s, I want to say 1946, there was a educational researcher by the name of Edgar Dale. And Edgar Dale, one of his well-known pieces of work is this pyramid, the learning pyramid. And this mirror, so imagine a pyramid, right? At the very top, you've got the tip. At the bottom, you've got the foundation. And it's an inverse pyramid in the sense that on the very top of this pyramid, Edgar Dale talks about how you are not the least efficient way of knowledge acquisition. And at the very bottom is the most efficient way for knowledge acquisition. So where you're an expert and you really know your material. And at the very top is how you're not an expert and how you don't know anything. What he points out in this particular diagram is that at the very top, you've got lecturing, where you're listening to other people speak to you. That is the least efficient way of learning. And I get into like not so healthy debates sometimes with other professors on this topic. But again, that's what he points out. At the very bottom, it's teaching. And in the middle of that is doing project work. So what a lot of our learning as we grew up, in our own experiences is typically along the lines of you have somebody talking to you, so a teacher in school, K through 12, or even in college, and then they give you some lab work or some projects and you do that and it builds on the knowledge you've been listening to. The challenge with that is as you listen to that knowledge, you might not retain as much of it. So when you do the work, you find the gaps and then you go close those gaps. That's the learning loop that most of us are used to. At the very top of that, or the very bottom of Edgar Dale's pyramid, is I'm now teaching that material. So the approach that I take is that of a teacher. Can I teach this information to somebody in the simplest of forms? Because I also recognize that communication is not what I do. Communication is what the listener does. So for me, can I communicate at the level of the listener so that they can receive the same level of expertise? Because I know, again, following that pyramid, me talking to that person isn't the least effective way for me to communicate. But I got to start somewhere. So this is why, I'm of the opinion you just have to do the work. If you want to learn about AI, you just have to use AI. You want to learn about a craft, you just have to go do it. Whether it's pottery or cooking, you just have to go do it. You'll fail, yes, that's okay. In fact, that is how we learn. But you got to do the work.
100%. So there's a reason that I haven't invested as much time in learning agents as I should have. I'm learning AI video. So my hands are on the keyboard in C-Dance and Nano Banana and learning how to hone in on those prompts to get the result that I'm looking for. Probably, and in the process have created my own AI slop. So Amir, let's go back to just go into some of your leadership skills and leading in this digital age of transformation, this age of AI. What habits do you feel young professionals should be building now?
There's a great book out there. It's called From Strength to Strength. And I think, what is his name? Arthur C. Brooks. Arthur C. Brooks is the author from Strength to Strength. And one of the examples he gives is that of Beethoven. And when you're younger, early in your career, you don't really have mastery of the craft that you've studied. So for young people, I would say you're living in an age now where a lot of companies can get the same value from your presence in the business and doing those basic tasks where AI can do that task. AI is in no way going to replace them. And I think that's kind of where the conversation is not very helpful, is when people say that you don't need juniors in your organization anymore. I think what the organizations are really missing is a platform to build these juniors into future leaders within their organization. And that to me is important. If you're going to build a business that has staying power, you want to build people from the ground up and you want to have them move around the different parts of your business, learning it, and then becoming leaders within that organization. I think that's a very good, healthy thing, because not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. I don't think that's what people want. Does AI enable more and more entrepreneurs? Absolutely. I think this is a very good example, because, if we look about how work expands, this is a time where the pie that is work is now so much bigger. I have Instagram reels that show up, so this is a little bit of a segue, right? I do have brain rot, but it's more like my wife and I watching videos that are stupid and we laugh together for like 10 minutes before we go to bed, right? That's really what it is. It's just decompressing for a few minutes. But now I'm seeing reels where people are like, oh, hey, here's how you can make $1,000 or $10,000 a month with these businesses where you're setting up AI systems for businesses, and you're not an expert, but you're doing all this work and they give you a script that you can go follow. To me, that's not really learning. Yes, you'll get to the learning by doing that, by following somebody else's script. And that's not a bad way to go about it. But for young people, if you want to build a career, decide early on, do I want to be an entrepreneur or do I want to work in another business? And if you're going to work in another business, understand what is it that you want to get out of that experience. Because if you don't have a goal that you want to achieve from working in that kind of environment, you will feel like I'm showing up to work and it's just anxiety on a Sunday night every time. You don't want that either. That's not healthy. But hey, if you want to be an entrepreneur, be very clear you want to be an entrepreneur and go chase the skills that you need in that domain. So whatever it is that you're passionate about, whether it's influencing or social media, but decide early on first. Number one, do I want to be an entrepreneur or do I want to go work in a business? If you want to go to do a business, work in a business, there's a very specific set of skills you got to go learn. If you want to be an entrepreneur, there's a very specific set of skills you want to learn. Understand what that means for your career. Right now, you're, let's say, 20 something early on. At some point, you're going to be 30 something. At some point, you're going to be 40 something. At some point, you're going to be 50 something. What does that mean for you as a human being? Like, you shouldn't stop at I'm 22 or 23, just graduating from college. You should think about what is it that your future in your 30s looks like if you live that long? What does your future in your 40s look like if you live that long? Have a plan. Execute that plan. If everything you're doing every day isn't adding up to that plan, what are you doing? And I'm sorry, I'm coming off a little blunt here, but
no,
what are you doing, right? That's really what I want to, communicate to young people is be intentional. And if anything, AI is telling us be intentional, because AI is only going to do what you tell it.
When you tell your kids, be 1% better, give us an example of something that you're currently doing with your kids to improve their AI literacy. And it can, it could be the most basic thing, just like you mentioned, telling AI, it's okay to not know the answer. It's okay to tell me that.
So I tell them what I'm doing with AI. So my kids are a little older now. They're 19 and 18, going to be 20 and 19. So it's a different way of communicating with them than when they were 5 and 6 or 12 and 13. Right now, they're very independent. They kind of do their own thing. And I only interact with them when we're having a meal together as a family, for example, which I cherish. But what I tell them is, instead of just asking them the question, hey, have you tried this with AI? Have you tried that with AI? I don't do that, because now I'm going to ask them to reflect back, and that takes away time and energy. And young people don't want to do that. At least my kids don't want to do that. They don't want to go back and reflect on things. It's just, I remember when I was 18 and 19, I wasn't doing that. I was just like, oh, what's the next cool thing? So instead of asking them and waiting for them, I simply tell them, hey, guess what I learned today? This is what I was doing with AI. Here's what my starting thesis was. Here's where it landed. Here's what it gave me. Here's what it did. And this is not an everyday occurrence, but when I do talk about AI and giving them AI literacy, I just tell them what I experienced today, just like I'm doing with you when you ask me those questions. And I just give them my insight because I know I'm doing more work in it than they are. So why not just give it to them? And some of it is going to stick, some of it is not going to stick, and that's okay. But at some point, hopefully, it'll sit in the back of their minds and they'll come back to it in a few years or a few weeks or a few months. And they would say, oh, yeah, I remember dad telling me about blah, 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 blah. And then, here we go. Now I've planted the seed, right? So that's kind of what I do with them.
I love that. Amir, in this conversation about AI, and you've touched on it with the liberal arts degrees and the critical thinking skills, how are you leading your teams using AI without losing those critical thinking skills? Can you give us an example?
Yeah. So I won't get into any specific things, but I'll tell you the philosophy behind what I'm doing. And the philosophy behind what I'm doing is very simply this, meet everybody where they are. And what I tell my leaders is, as a human being, philosophically speaking, like my philosophy is I want to, any person I meet, I want to leave them better than I found them. And I don't explicitly spell that out to them, but that is always my goal. I meet somebody, my goal is I should give you value to where after you met me, you felt like I'm a better person, I'm more informed, I'm in some way a little bit better than when I met you in the first place. With that lens, I usually will talk to my leaders with the sense that some of our teammates are going to do better, some of our teammates are not going to do better, but the work needs to live with them. So my goal is to create the environment that will allow people to thrive and give them the opportunity to just go grab it. And I think that level of transparency is better than me trying to dictate to them, you must go do this. Because I've been in technology for almost 3 decades, and I will tell you, this is the most disruptive piece of technology I've ever seen because we are all living and learning at the same time. I am no more of an expert than somebody else. The most expert people are the people building these technologies out there, the LLMs. So the people working in Anthropic and Claude, OpenAI and all that, those are the ones who are truly at the forefront of this. But those people are also making decisions for us without asking us. And that to me, as a consumer of this technology, means that the level of empathy I show myself with that information should be the same level of empathy that I show my teammates, the people who are working alongside me, who are building this business together, because they too are impacted by decisions made by a handful of people who think that 8 billion people plus on the planet ought to be behaving a specific way or ought to be doing things a specific way.
You touched on something again from that last episode, that this is why we should be having conversations with different people, not just industry leaders, but again, people in the liberal arts, and you said leave people better off, than where you found them. And that's actually something you mentioned in the previous episode that you were on. So I feel that just lends to your authenticity. You have that same message. So oh my gosh, I don't know why this happens. You're the only person, because you speak to so much and my mind just goes, I'm trying to listen while I'm also thinking of the next question. And then you just bring up things. I'm like thinking of all the questions. So when I have you on again, I'm going to bring a notebook so I can jot all these things down.
Well, that's why I hold a pencil in my hand, is because I have a notebook here to my side where I just jot things down sometimes. But on the topic of authenticity, I'll leave you with another thought. One of the ways that I think authenticity doesn't show up very well, and probably will show up maybe not so well in the future either, because I've seen this show up very subtly in places, is if you think about a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old, we call them authentic because they don't have any filters. They just go and say whatever's top of mind for them. And
Not my child when she was 2 or 3 telling my mom, oh, grandma, that dress does not look good on you.
yeah, exactly. There's no filter on that, right? So as more and more of us become comfortable with a lack of filter because AI is doing something for us, or we just get used to talking to AI so much that we just, forget our basic human skills and we start talking to people like they're AI, you know? So what I notice very subtly is authenticity gets confused with just saying whatever is coming first to your mind without first thinking about the impact of those words, because words are very powerful things. So as I think about the word authenticity, and I know you've thank you for using that word with me. I appreciate your kindness towards me. I think a lot of people, the younger generation, maybe even the folks my age, we should be very mindful about what we call authentic, to the point that set the bar high, because it's easy. Like, I will spend a Saturday afternoon talking to my AI and working on projects and just writing notes down feverishly, right? And then I'll talk to my wife and I get agitated. And she's like, what's wrong with you? And I realize because my wife isn't responding the same way as my AI is. you know?
But that's so I've started to use Claude more than ChatGPT. One, Gen Z has kind of shamed me into, oh, you're
Yeah.
using ChatGPT, you're old. So, but I do feel Claude is the better LLM the more I work with it.
Yeah.
But the other day I caught myself thinking, God, Claude's not nice. Like ChatGPT would be like, I got you, bestie. This is how we're going to tackle this challenge. And Claude's just matter of fact. And it actually will show you, like, it's pulling from these web resources and it's analyzing. And it'll tell you as it's going through the steps. And it's sometimes so long, there's an option there, notify me when Claude is ready, right? And then it's just boom, gives you the information. And I had to catch myself and think, Dani, it's not real. Like, it's not a person. And why do you care if it's nice to you or not?
So I'll share another AI tip with you. And this is something that I don't know how many listeners would know about or not. But one of the things you can, speaking of permission, right? So you want to give Claude permission because we don't know what is it defaulting to. So I have so Claude has something called pre-flight constraints. And you can say, hey, Claude, I want you to tell me what your pre-flight constraints are when you talk to me. And you probably have nothing because it just will default to whatever you've set it. So what I've done over time is I've given it some constraints, and I've said, for example, I never want you to talk to me to flatter me or to be a sycophant. And every time it talks to me, that's one of its pre-flight constraints. Or I'll say, I never want you to give me a source that I can never click on a link and see the page for myself. Right. So, and there's a list of these things, not a long list, but there's a list of these things. So what happens now is, and one of the things is also, hey, it's okay if you don't know, just tell me you don't know. Don't make
Yes.
things up. Like, that's one of the pre-flight constraints. What has happened over time is that it actually tells me that, hey, I need this because I don't know that. Once you give me this, I can do that. It's now at that level when I interact with it. Or it'll tell me, hey, I found this link, and just so you know, it's on a paywall, but I'm going to find similar links, especially when
Yes.
it's finding news articles. The pre-flight constraints to me is really important, and it's become better now, I think, than it was a year ago. So anybody who's using AI, pre-flight constraints, do that all day long.
Yes, I am going to go check. I know mine don't have any. So I'm going to go put some in now, especially the one where it's okay to not know the answer.
Yes.
And again, this is the writer in me who can find meaning in anything and is always thinking about what ifs. But several times during this conversation, you mentioned AI telling it it's okay to not know. And it's funny because don't we tell our kids that? It's okay to not know the answer. Or even when I just gave a talk on stage and was reminded, you're going to get a question. And if you don't know the answer, it's okay to say, I don't know that, but can I get your contact information? And I can either follow up with you with once I find out the right answer or connect you with someone who has the answer to that question. And in a way, that's adding a touch of humanity to the machine. And I'm just like right here, just like, whoa, wait a sec. Like now we're teaching the machine how to be human. And I'm just reflecting. I'm having a moment with that right now. I'm probably, what is the expression? Anthropomorphizing or, the machine. But it, yeah, I have no words. It feels like we're giving some humanity to the machine.
So the EU no longer qualifies the AI as just a tool because a tool is, deterministic. If I pick out a hammer and I hammer in some nails, I can put it back on the shelf and it's not going to do any more work until I pick it back up again. We're already seeing legislatively around the world where some of these things are happening. Another thing that has become, something of concern for businesses is that if you have a product that's completely built by AI, source code wise, like software that's built by AI, it could jeopardize your ability to become insured for specific types of catastrophes. Like what if your software causes damage, right? So insurance companies may not want to insure your business if you're running or building software that is entirely generated by code. And it goes back to the question you asked, should I even advertise that it's AI generated anymore? I don't think you have to advertise, just assume it is. But to some level, right, there's that argument will break down with this example that I gave you where I have a business, but I want to get it insured. And then my business runs on software that I write, but it's generated by machines. What does that mean for your companies that are Fortune 100 who are now building more and more of their software with these types of technologies? So the implication is doesn't stop with just me as a user, right? It reflects into the businesses that we support and we run.
And the arts as well. So that was one of the discussions we had back in January was if you create art with AI, can you copyright it? And the answer is no, you can't. And some of the art is so elaborate, so many prompts to create the one image. But at the end of the day, it couldn't be copyrighted because so much was done by AI. And that's going to have implications for, we've seen songs now that there was a song that hit the Billboard, like did really well. I think it was number one, and it's not going to be copyrighted. And that's interesting to think about. I didn't realize though that I'm thinking of it as a creative, right? And now I actually feel a little bit better about not knowing much about agents because I've been working with AI video because that is feeding my passion and what I eventually would like to do. But I never thought about the business side of coding and using AI to build software and having the insurance. That's news in and of itself to me.
Yeah, this is something that happened this year, and I haven't dug into it too deeply. But again, this is why I have an AI agent giving me the news every day, right? So, and I do go and click on the links to make sure that I'm not being fed hallucinated information. Like I said, this is all changing every single day.
But that's a good point because with constant information being thrown at us, I'll tell my husband, "Oh, I read this." I'll even say, "I read this headline." And he goes, "Oh, well, did you read the article?" And I said, "Well, no, I just read the headline, and if it interests me, I will click on it. But Apple is just throwing headlines that it thinks I want to read. And some of it is interesting, but some of it, I just don't dig down into it. So using the tool that you have, it's actually, it's specific to you. So it knows you've trained it and it knows what you want to see. So that's something I think I'm going to go and do when I get home is find and limit it. I know my flaws, and if I feel overwhelmed and like, oh, I'm going to back off of that and I'm going to go do something, this other thing. And so just tell it 3 to 5 articles that keep me present, keep me up to date. And I want it targeted like AI and art, right? So it's going to go and find that and cut through the noise for me. And there is something that you wrote about that I found interesting. And you were actually the first person that came across my feed to discuss this. And I don't think we're discussing it enough. Someone just yesterday brought this back and I was like, great, because I have someone who's coming on the podcast that I can ask this to. We are being told that AI is freeing up work or freeing up time, right? It's doing all these menial tasks that take time. And so then that gives me more time to go play with my dog, to go visit my child at college. But I feel, and what other people are seeing, is that it's freeing up time to do more work. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you wrote a LinkedIn post to that. Can you elaborate on that for us, for people who didn't read it?
Yeah. So the data is clear. The more time we have, the more ways we'll fill it with work is really the bottom line. And I mean, we don't have to look beyond our own selves. If I have nothing to do for a day or two or a week, what are you doing? You're feeling anxious. You want to get back and do something productive. Happens to me when I'm away for a week on a beach vacation. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, what's happening at 2 o'clock? Are we going? Like, you start thinking of so many different things to fill your time with. And this is no different. And in fact, one of the behaviors that I've read in other places is when you use AI, you actually fall into what's called chat bait. So people talk about clickbait, where you click on a link and you go down this rabbit hole of clicking on links. This is what blog websites or news websites are optimizing for, one of the ways. Chat bait is basically the same concept, but applied to, I'm having a conversation with an AI. AI asked me the next question. It gave me something that made me think about something else, and now I'm asking it to do something else. So you fall into this trap where you're constantly chasing the words to drive action. And so the comment you're making is, I believe it to be true, which is, we will fill our free time with more work unless we are intentional about not doing that.
So, Amir, about your leadership legacy, because I kind of want to bring it back to that as you are navigating this age of AI. At the end of the day, what would you like to be known for?
That I was somebody who was always looking to serve others. Titles are what other people give you. It's not something that you give yourself. You can give yourself a title, but if nobody else uses it, is it really a title?
Oh,
So for me, it's, can I just have somebody tell me once that I was useful to them? And not so much for extrinsic validation, because I think that's something we're all trained on from a very young age. Your teacher gives you an A, your mom says good job. Like, extrinsic validation is baked into us, all of us. But if you can have somebody say with honesty, at least for me, like, this is what I'm looking for, is somebody could honestly say, hey, that person was really useful to me and they helped me in these ways. That's really it. Like, for me, that would make my day.
I, you can't see, I am tearing up because that's something that I worry about. And now, since when you gave that answer, I was reminded of, oh yeah, this is what I would like, to ask based on the conversation that we've been having. I worry about the future generation, and I feel that as I've gotten older, that's a sentiment that's just echoed by previous generations. Like, oh, this next generation, they don't know anything, which I don't feel that way. I do not feel that way, but I can see why older generations worry about the next one. And as our kids have been raised in a world of echo chambers and mainly communicating online, I know certain people who have no friends in real life. It's, these relationships that they've made online with some people that they've never met, right? And you speak to leaving people better off, and you speak to being impactful in someone's life. And I wonder, do you worry sometimes about the future generation and that ability to communicate with others who think differently than they do, who, you know, I'm struggling a little bit to find this, and I guess I can use something personal. I navigate a world and work that is really conservative, and I am left leaning. I look different. But again, I use that term navigate because it is a skill to be able to speak and communicate with someone who thinks differently than you and to not get angry and to be able to hold space for a different opinion. You know, at this conference that I went to, I came across two people who do not like Gavin Newsom, and they told me exactly how they felt. And, you know, I listened and, at times made a joke like, well, he is a good looking man. And they were like, yeah, but beauty's skin deep. And would talk about his policies. And I mentioned, well, this is what I believe and this is how I feel. And at both of those conversations, no one left angry. It was just people with two different viewpoints. And it was interesting too, because I really don't talk politics in real life, but the opportunity was, I say opportunity, the topic just came up. And I don't know if someone younger could have done that. And maybe I'm just broad stroking it, but I'm curious as a leader and someone with also younger kids, is that something that you think about?
So you might not like my answer, but I'll just say it. And I don't worry about the future generation. And I'll tell you why. One, it's overwhelming. I can't control the outcomes whatsoever. What I can control is how I show up and how I behave. One of the things that we realize as you move up the leadership ladder is that you're very alone. There isn't really somebody who you can just open up and confide in. This is where your family and your support structure comes in. If I can demonstrate through my actions, through my words, through my writings, through my whatever, if I can demonstrate the kind of behaviors and model it for others, then the best I should do is I should hope that somebody will copy it and replicate it for themselves. And this will then become the force multiplier that will help the future generation. Because I'm not going to live long enough to see the work I did and how it panned out. Maybe it stops after me, and that's okay. Maybe it stops after my kids. That's okay too. But what is it that I have done individually to better myself? You go on an airplane, what is the first thing they tell you? They say, put a mask on your face in the case of an emergency before you put on the person next to you, right? Even if it's a child. Well, if you can't breathe on that airplane, how are you going to help anybody else? And I'm a firm believer that we're all made differently so that we can learn from one another. We all have the ability to influence each other. We all have the ability to change one another's mind. The question that you're asking and that you're sharing with your example is, are you willing to change your mind based on somebody else's perspective? And are you willing to hold that tension in your mind as you receive this information? Because it could trigger you. I get triggered at work sometimes, and I tell my teammates when I do get triggered that, hey, what you're saying here actually triggers me. But then I explain why. And then I explain why I think that is the case. Not to make anybody uncomfortable, but just to let them know that, hey, I want you to say what you're saying, but just know that this is how it impacted me, right? Whether they do it again or not, I don't hold it against them. They could very much do it again, and it would be like, okay, I tried, right? So that's really what I take that perspective. Like, it's hard for me to think about future generation, and
No, you again are resonating with some of what the chaplain said. There have always been disruptions in history. At the end of the day, how are you showing up? And I did not expect to get teary-eyed during this conversation, Amir. I thought it was, again, just going to be a tech one to help the listener navigate AI, help their AI literacy, because that's where my heart lies, in just helping people level up their success. And I was taken back to when my child was young. When you have a kid, you can get caught up with expectations and you see what other parents are doing, and is my child at that same level? How am I helping them succeed? And Leda came home one day with a note from the teacher, and the teacher wanted to tell me that there was a little boy that had trouble making friends, and all the other kids were playing and he was playing by himself. And Leda went over and was like, "What are you doing?" He said he was collecting rocks, and she asked if she could join him. And that has always been my child. My child notices who the one is that's feeling left out and will go sit and talk with them. And in that moment, I was like, you know what? Because my child and I are very different. I want the A, and they are happy with passing the class. And I said, you know what? At the end of the day, if my child lives life as a kind human being, then I've done my job as a parent. And in this age, it's disruptive in this time where AI is disrupting so much. What keeps you human? What keeps you kind? Go out and do that. And Amir, my God, I want to go get some tissue now.
I'm so sorry, Dani.
No, thank you not only for sharing your wisdom with AI, because again, it's the whole point of these conversations is to have people come and sit. Before it was the C-suite, but now I like to think of it as sitting at the kitchen table with just someone. It's low key, and you're getting to talk one-on-one and with them, hear their life stories, but also you gave us some advice, and I hope that it carries the listener forward and gives them something to think about as we are all navigating just something new. So Amir, I again cannot thank you enough for sharing your time once again with the.
Well, I'm grateful that you've allowed me this opportunity to sit here and have this conversation with you.
Amir, I told you I wasn't expecting to cry, and yet there we were. For everyone listening, if you've been feeling that quiet pressure that everything is getting louder, that the messages are getting more polished, that something real is getting lost in the shuffle, you're not imagining it. And the answer isn't to log off or fight the tools. The answer is what Amir said. Be intentional. Set that bar high. Give yourself and your AI and the people in your life permission to not have all the answers. That's the leadership that holds up. Coming up next week, we're flipping the format. Darren Newbold is coming back, and my friend Nicole Ketchum, who's also been on the podcast before, is joining us. Both of us took Darren's Enneagram and Purpose Factor assessments, and instead of just talking about what coaching looks like, we let y'all listen in on the real thing. Yes, a live coaching session with 2 clients, 1 coach, and a whole lot of self-awareness happening in real time. If you've ever been curious about the Enneagram, about purpose, or what it feels like to have someone help you read your own map, this is the episode. So I'll see you there. Stay curious and stay kind, y'all. With Hat and Cattle, signing off.